So Keith Boykin's my favorite person on this panel for one simple reason, although I love them all equally. In 1989, students at the law school started agitating that the school should have a course on sexual orientation in the law. There had never been a course like this before. And some of my former professors thought I was the right person to teach it. It was a great opportunity. In 1990, I think I started teaching sexual orientation law courses. Actually, at the time, there was no case book or anything. And I put together materials to teach the course, and my students helped me turn the materials into a case book, one of whom, Jennifer Gordon, is sitting right here, was part of the architect of the case book. In the second year I was teaching, there was a guy who sat in the back of the class and was obviously struggling to come out, named Keith Boykin. He was kind of a quiet but star student who I took note of. This was in 1991, I think, and Keith was struggling to come out. Within a year, President Clinton was elected, and Keith was working in the White House as the liaison in LGBT issues. So a meteoric rise of a Harvard Law School graduate from the back of a class on sexual orientation law to the White House. I can't tell you how spectacular that was in that time, at that moment. I mean, if you think about everything people have been saying, to go from what Larry described as his law school years to having Keith in the White House, it's quite amazing. Welcome.
Wow, thank you. Well, my story picks up where Suzanne's story ends, in that the organization Cogley had changed to Cogbly by adding a B in my second year, I think. But I was an activist on campus, and the group that Suzanne referred to was called the Coalition for Civil Rights. And it was 7 different affinity groups, including the Black Law Students Association, the Women's Law Association, and Cogbly and others. And we agitated by holding protests. We went to the dean's office and held sit-ins. We went to the president's office. And one day I remember I was standing outside of a faculty meeting in Pound Hall when all the faculty members strolled out after the meeting, and the dean of the law school walked by, Robert Clark, who I just saw a few moments ago for the first time in years. And he walked by, and I asked him, I said, "Hey, Dean Clark, why don't you come and talk to us?" And he continued walking and ignored us. And so I called him again. I said, "Hey, come back and talk to us." And again, he turned around, didn't know who I was, and kept walking toward the door. So at that point, I grabbed my backpack and slung it over my shoulder and took my sign I'd been carrying and put it under my arm and started racing to the door to catch up to him. And the dean of the Harvard Law School, this is a true story, Robert C. Clark, saw me and literally began sprinting across the campus to get away from me. And it was a shocking thing to me. And I ran track in college. I went sprinting right after him. And it was just an amazing experience that here he was. I was chasing the dean of the Harvard Law School across the campus. And we invited members of the press to our events, and there was a photographer from the Boston Globe who took a picture of me, and that photo appeared on the front page of the Metro section of the Boston Globe the next day. So I sort of became infamous on campus as being this agitator for these issues. And we took this case all the way up to, we actually filed a lawsuit against the law school for discrimination and selection of the faculty. We argued the case ourselves as students. We took the case all the way up to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, where we lost on the issue of standing, because they said we were, I think, incidental beneficiaries. And I didn't realize until last night I was having dinner with Jansen. He told me this case actually created some sort of precedent, which I didn't realize. But that was an interesting development for me. But it was also the time when I came out. I came out in law school, as Bill mentioned. I took 2 courses, Race, Racism in Law, and Sexual Orientation Law at the same time, one by Randall Kennedy and one by Bill Rubenstein. And I kept seeing that the arguments that were being used in one context were the same in the other context. I struggled with how come it was acceptable to use these same unjustifiable arguments in the sexual orientation context that had already been disbanded or discredited in the racial context. So that's what led me to sort of pursue this whole sort of avenue that I've been on for the rest of my life. But just one quick story about my coming out experience. I was in law school. I went to a bookstore at Harvard Square. I found a book or two that seemed to interest me. There was no LGBTQ section at that time, just a gay section. I took the book home, read that book, that entire book that night, and I came out to myself that day. The next day, I came out to my mom in Killeen, Texas. I called her up on the phone and came out to her. It was a very difficult conversation. And the following day, I went to campus and started coming out to other people. And that was really, really difficult because I didn't know how people would react to me coming out, because I'd been sort of this activist on campus, and I'd been involved in Balsa. But it was a very positive experience, except that it was a little traumatic. I didn't want to actually come out. I wanted to be out. So that's when I discovered what I have now called the first rule of coming out, which I learned here at the law school. And the rule is this: if you tell the right people, you don't have to tell everyone else. And I'll just quickly tell you how it worked. One quick example. I didn't realize how many people found out I was gay until one day I was sitting in a meeting with, I guess I can mention his name, with my friend and Professor Chris Edley, who I'd known from previous work in the Dukakis campaign. So he was more than just a professor, he was a friend of mine. And after the meeting, he closed the door and sat on the edge of the desk, and he says to me, "So I hear that you're gay now, is that true?" And I said, "Yes, but how did you know?" And he told me that one of the other professors had told him about it. And so I was shocked, because for a long time I'd actually labored under the delusion that the faculty at Harvard Law School had more important things to do with their time. But I guess I was wrong.